The moon, a sliver of conspiratorial silver, offered just enough light. For Karen Sterling, it was the perfect accomplice. Dressed in her favorite lilac pajama set, the one with the embroidered kitten, she knelt in the damp, cool grass, the metal of the garden trowel cold against her palm. The scent of freshly turned earth filled her nostrils, a primal aroma of righteous labor. This wasn't vandalism, it was a corrective measure, unnecessary, if unorthodox, enforcement of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions that bound the community of Harmony Creek Village together. Her target was the brand new cedar fence belonging to the new neighbor at 12B, a man named Alex Chen. He'd installed it last Tuesday, a fence that, by her precise laser measurement, stood a full 1.5 inches taller than the 6-foot maximum stipulated in Bylaw 7, Section 4C. But the height was merely the opening salvo of its transgressions. Its primary sin, the one that prompted this nocturnal mission, was its placement. It ran flush against the property line, casting a long, oppressive shadow over the most sacred patch of soil in all of Harmony Creek, her prismatic starlight serenity petunia bed. These weren't just flowers, they were her legacy. 5 consecutive Garden of the Year awards from the HOA Beautification Committee, which she of course chaired. The petunias required a minimum of 8 hours of direct, unfiltered sunlight. Alex Chen's monolithic cedar wall was stealing at least 45 minutes of crucial morning light. It was horticultural assassination. She'd tried the civil approach. First, a polite laminated note left on his doorstep, highlighting the relevant bylaws. It was ignored. Then came the certified letter, a masterpiece of passive-aggressive legalese she'd spent an entire afternoon crafting with her husband, Robert, who had simply nodded and said, "Looks good, dear," without looking up from his golf magazine. The letter went unanswered. Finally, she'd confronted Mr. Chen while he was carrying in groceries. "Mr. Chen," she had begun, her voice a carefully modulated instrument of firm but fair authority. Regarding the unapproved vertical barrier, he had smiled, a matte, placid smile. "You mean my fence? Call me Alex. And it's a lovely fence, isn't it? Great for privacy. It's a violation, Alex." She'd clipped the casual use of his first name, grating on her. "It's oversized and its placement is starving my internationally recognized hybrid petunias." He had actually chuckled, a low, infuriating sound. Internationally recognized. Wow, that's impressive. "Look, Karen, it's on my property line. It's a fence. They cast shadows. That's kind of what they do." And then he'd just walked inside, leaving her standing on the pristine, HOA-approved sidewalk, sputtering. The sheer disrespect was galling. He'd treated the bylaws, the very constitution of their civilized existence, as a joke. So now, here she was. If he wouldn't respect the established property line, she would clarify it for him. A little exploratory digging. Just a small, tidy trench right under the fence line. It would prove that the foundation posts encroached, that the structure was fundamentally unstable, a hazard. It was a strategic move, a prelude to a formal complaint backed by physical evidence. The trowel scraped against a rock, the sound jarring in the suburban silence. She froze, listening, only the hum of a distant air conditioner and the chirping of crickets. Robert was fast asleep inside, oblivious, his CPAP machine hissing a steady rhythm. He wouldn't understand this level of commitment. Scrape, thud. Scrape. The soil was richer here, darker. She was making good progress. A neat little channel forming under the bottom rail of the fence. A sense of profound satisfaction washed over her. This was what leadership felt like. Getting your hands dirty for the greater good, upholding standards, protecting the petunias. Find what you're looking for. Bevoice.com, and laced with amusement, came from directly above her. Karen shrieked, a sound more befitting a startled barn owl than the president of the Harmony Creek HOA. She scrambled backward, losing her balance and landing with a soft thump on the damp lawn. Her lilac pajamas now streaked with mud. Looming over the fence was the silhouette of Alex Chen. The moonlight caught the glint of his glasses. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. He was holding a mug, steam gently rising from it. "Bit late for gardening, isn't it, Karen?" he asked, his voice a low murmur. Hot, prickly shame flooded Karen's entire body. A sensation so intense it was almost painful. She was caught, not just caught, but caught in the most undignified way imaginable. In her pajamas, on her hands and knees, covered in dirt, wielding a tiny trowel like a deranged gnome. "I was checking for invasive root systems," she stammered, the lie so flimsy it felt pathetic even as it left her lips. "Japanese knotweed. It's a menace." Bylaw 11, Section 2A, Homeowner responsibility to prevent cross-property contamination. Alex took a slow sip from his mug. "Ah, of course. The knotweed sneaky stuff. Tends to only come out after midnight, I hear. You know, Karen, if you wanted to take a soil sample, you could have just asked. I would have even let you use a proper shovel." His tone wasn't malicious. It was worse. It was pitying. He was treating her like a silly, confused child. All her authority, her carefully constructed persona as the neighborhood's matriarch, evaporated into the cool night air. "This fence is a violation," she said, finding a sliver of her usual fire. She pushed herself to her feet, trying to brush the mud from her pants with a shaking hand. "We can talk about it in the morning," Alex said, his voice still infuriatingly gentle. "And you're not excavating. Get some sleep, Karen. You'll catch a cold out here." He turned and disappeared back into the darkness of his yard. The silence he left behind was heavier, more mocking, than any tirade could have been. Karen stood there for a full minute, trembling with a cocktail of humiliation and pure, unadulterated rage. He hadn't threatened her. He hadn't called the police. He had dismissed her. She snatched her trowel from the ground, stomped back to her perfectly manicured lawn, and slammed her patio door shut. The sound echoed in the quiet house. Inside, under the sterile glow of the kitchen's under-cabinet lighting, she saw her reflection in the dark window, a wild-eyed woman with dirt on her cheek and grass in her hair. This was not over. This was a declaration of war. Alex Chen had made a powerful enemy tonight. He had underestimated her resolve. He had mocked the very foundations of Harmony Creek, and by extension, he had mocked her. He would learn that some lines, like property lines, were not to be crossed, and some molehills were destined to become mountains. The next morning, Karen awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. The humiliation of the previous night had crystallized into a diamond-hard resolve. She showered, dressed in her sharpest navy blue pantsuit, her official business attire, and prepared for battle. Robert was already in the kitchen, pouring cereal. "Rough night?" he mumbled, gesturing towards the muddy pajamas she'd left in a heap by the laundry room door. "Looked like you wrestled a badger." "Robert, I am in the midst of a serious crisis, and I don't have time for your folksy observations," she snapped. "The new neighbor is a menace, an anarchist who openly flouts the rules that hold this community together." "The one with the fence?" Robert asked, crunching on his bran flakes. "Seemed like a nice enough guy when I saw him at the mailbox." "That's how it always starts," Karen said darkly, pouring her coffee. "With a smile and a non-compliant fence. It's a slippery slope, Robert. Today it's a fence. Tomorrow it's unmowed lawns, cars on blocks, and heavens knows what else. Chaos." She was about to launch into a detailed breakdown of her multi-pronged strategy for retribution, when she glanced out the kitchen window, towards Alex's yard, and she froze, the coffee cup halfway to her lips. The hole she had so painstakingly dug was still there, but it was no longer just a hole. Overnight, Alex had transformed it. He had cordoned off the area under his fence with miniature yellow caution tape, the kind used for model train sets. He'd placed a tiny hand-painted sign next to the trench. In elegant, almost calligraphic script, it read, "The Karen Sterling Memorial Excavation Site, EST 2025. But that wasn't all. Surrounding the hole, he had arranged a diorama. A half-dozen garden gnomes, the cheerful, pointy-hatted kind, were posed in various states of archaeological discovery. One gnome peered into the hole with a tiny magnifying glass, another was pushing a miniature wheelbarrow, a third was taking notes on a minuscule clipboard, and right in the center, positioned to be perfectly visible from Karen's kitchen window, was a single custom-painted female gnome. It was wearing a lilac pajama set and holding a tiny, silver-painted trowel. Karen's coffee cup clattered into its saucer. It was a masterpiece of passive aggression, a silent, meticulously crafted monument to her shame. It was brilliant. It was insulting, it was hilarious, and that was the worst part. He was laughing at her. He was turning her crusade into a joke, for the whole neighborhood to see. Her phone buzzed. It was Brenda, her second-in-command on the HOA board and chief gossip. "Karen, have you seen it? I saw it on my morning power walk. What on earth is going on at 1-2B? It's a declaration of war." "Brenda," Karen said, her voice low and dangerous, "and he's about to find out he's picked a fight he cannot win. Call an emergency board meeting tonight. 7 o'clock, my house." As she spoke, she stared out the window, at the lilac-clad gnome, frozen in its perpetual act of digging. The sun was rising higher now. The fluorescent green fence caps were a stroke of diabolical genius. They pulsed with an almost radioactive glee, a constant, silent taunt visible from every window on the north side of Corin's house. They were a monument to her impotence. The certified letter, her powerful legal weapon, had been parried with a paintbrush and a loophole. Alex Chen hadn't broken the rules. He'd weaponized them. This realization sent Karen into a spiral of obsessive strategy. The fence was a symptom. Alex was the disease, a contagion of nonconformity that had to be quarantined. If the HOA board was too timid to act decisively, then she would have to mobilize a different kind of power. Public opinion. Her first move was to establish the Harmony Creek Neighborhood Vigilance Committee. It sounded official, important. In reality, it was Karen, Brenda, and, after much cajoling, a reluctant Robert. Their first meeting was held in Karen's immaculate garage, amidst neatly labeled bins and hanging tools. The mission, Karen declared, pointing to a whiteboard she'd set up, is observation and documentation. We are the eyes and ears of this community. We will create a comprehensive behavioral log for property 1-B. Robert sighed, sinking lower into a plastic lawn chair. "You mean we're going to spy on the guy?" "It's not spying, Robert. It's proactive community monitoring," Karen corrected him sharply. "Brenda, you take the 0600 to 1200 shift. I'll take 1200 to 1800. Robert, you have the evening watch. I have my bowling league on Tuesdays, Robert protested weakly. The league can survive your absence. The very fabric of this neighborhood cannot, Karen said with grim finality. She handed them each a spiral notebook and a pair of binoculars. Log everything. Arrival times, departure times, visitors, deliveries, duration of lawn watering, decibel level of music, everything. We are looking for a pattern of non-compliance. For the first few days, the logbook entries were disappointingly mundane. 8:14, subject departed in a silver sedan. 14:32, package delivered by Amazon, medium-sized box. 19:03, lights on in living room. It was hardly the dossier of a neighborhood anarchist. Alex seemed to lead a remarkably quiet life. He worked, he came home, he received packages. The only point of interest was the memorial excavation site. It was becoming a local attraction. Karen would see neighbors on their evening walks, pause, point, and chuckle. The gnomes had become silent celebrities. Alex had even added a new one, a gnome in a tiny navy blue pantsuit, pointing an accusatory finger at the gnome in the lilac pajamas. It was a miniature effigy of her. The humiliation was a fresh wound every time she saw it. Frustrated by the lack of actionable intelligence, Karen decided to escalate from passive observation to active information gathering. It was time for a whispering campaign. She started during her morning walks, artfully steering conversations with neighbors toward the situation at 12B. It's just such a shame, she'd say to Mrs. Gable from down the street, her voice dripping with concern. Such a lovely house. But the new owner, I've heard things, very transient lifestyle, you know. Is he even an owner? Or just a renter? You never know these days. To young Tim, who was washing his car, she'd mention that fence of his. It's a real safety hazard. My Robert says the posts look shallow. A strong wind could send the whole thing into the street. A real danger to children. The seeds of doubt were planted. But Alex, infuriatingly, was disarming them as quickly as she could sow them. He was friendly. He waved to everyone. He brought Mrs. Gable's trash bins up from the curb. He offered to lend Tim his pressure washer. He was, by all accounts, a model neighbor, except for the glowing green fence caps in the gnome shrine to Karen's midnight folly. Karen's obsession was becoming a tangible presence in her own home. The dining room table was now her command center, covered in maps of the neighborhood, surveillance logs, and printouts of the CC&Rs. Robert began taking his meals in the den. The quiet hum of the television, a refuge from his wife's relentless crusade. The distance between them grew, a silent chasm paved with resentment and binoculars. One evening, while Robert was supposedly on his evening watch, Karen's suspicions were aroused. He'd been gone for over an hour, far longer than it took to circle the block. With a knot of dread in her stomach, she crept to her upstairs bedroom window, the one that offered a clear, if distant, view of Alex's front porch, and there he was, her husband Robert, sitting on Alex Chin's porch swing, sharing a beer with the enemy. They were laughing, not just polite chuckles, but deep, genuine belly laughs. The sight was a physical blow. It was treason. Her own husband, her conscripted soldier in this war, was fraternizing with the opposition. She watched, frozen, as Robert clapped Alex on the shoulder, said his goodbyes, and started walking home, a jaunty spring in his step she hadn't seen in years. When he walked through the door, humming, she was waiting for him in the foyer, her arms crossed, her face a mask of cold fury. "Enjoy your little chat with the anarchist?" she asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Robert's good mood evaporated. He had the decency to look guilty. "Karen, I was just trying to smooth things over. He's really not a bad guy. He thinks the whole thing is kind of funny." "Funny?" The word exploded from her. "He builds an illegal fence. He mocks me with ceramic dolls. He turns our property line into a public spectacle, and you think it's funny. You went behind my back, Robert. You betrayed me." "Betrayed you?" "Karen, this isn't a war. It's a disagreement about a fence. I'm trying to stop you from getting sued or having a stroke over some petunias." "My petunias won Garden of the Year 5 times, she shrieked. "What have you ever won, Robert, besides a C in miniature golf?" The cruelty of her own words hung in the air between them. Robert's face fell. He looked older, tired. "That was a low blow, Karen, was it?" she shot back, unwilling to retreat. "Or was it the truth? You don't support me. You undermine me. You'd rather be friends with the man who is systematically destroying the aesthetic and moral fabric of this neighborhood than stand by your own wife." "He's not destroying anything." Robert's voice rose, finally matching her volume. "He's just living his life, something you've seemed to forget how to do. Your whole world has shrunk to the size of that fence. It's sad." He didn't wait for a reply. He just walked past her, up the stairs, and a moment later she heard the firm click of their bedroom door shutting. She was left alone in the foyer, the silence of the house pressing in on her. The consequence of her escalating campaign was no longer just a garish fence or a mocking diorama. It had breached her own walls. The conflict had a new casualty, her marriage. For the first time, a flicker of doubt entered her mind. Was it possible she had gone too far? The thought was terrifying. and she pushed it away with practiced force. No, this was a test of her leadership. Robert's betrayal only proved how insidious Alex's influence was. He wasn't just a bad neighbor, he was a corrupting force. This only strengthened her resolve. She had to win. She had to prove to Robert, to the neighborhood, to Alex himself, that she was right. Her next move had to be more powerful, more official. She couldn't rely on neighborhood gossip or a compromised husband. She would hit Alex where it truly hurt, his property value. She spent the next 2 days poring over county records and zoning ordinances, searching for a new weapon. And then, she found it. A little-known view preservation ordinance, intended to protect sightlines to natural landmarks. Harmony Creek was built on a gentle slope, and from certain angles you could see a sliver of distant Blue Mountain dot. Karen stood on her back deck with a surveyor's transit she'd rented, her heart pounding with excitement. She aligned it carefully. From the exact center of her deck, Alex's fence, at its illegal height, perfectly bisected the view of the mountain's peak. It was a long shot, a creative interpretation of the ordinance, but it was technically true. She had him. She filed a formal complaint with the county zoning board, bypassing the HOA entirely. It was a masterful stroke, escalating the conflict to a higher authority, one that Alex couldn't charm with beer and bonhomie. The complaint was filled with dramatic language. The unapproved structure constitutes a significant obstruction of the designated Blue Mountain Scenic View Corridor, negatively impacting the aesthetic character and market value of surrounding properties. A week later, an official county inspector arrived. Karen watched from her window, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. The inspector, a wary-looking woman with a clipboard, walked the property line with Alex. They talked for a long time. Alex pointed at the fence, then at Karen's house, then at the mountain. He seemed to be explaining something, making gestures. The inspector nodded, scribbled some notes, and left. Karen waited, buzzing with anticipation. She expected a violation notice to be slapped on Alex's door at any moment. Instead, that evening, she saw a new addition to his yard. Next to the Nome Memorial, Alex had installed a beautiful, handcrafted wooden signpost. It looked like something from a national park. It had 2 arms pointing in different directions. One pointed towards the distant mountain, with the words Blue Mountain Peak, Elev, 2,412 feet, neatly carved into it. The other arm pointed directly at Karen's house. The carving on that one read, Volcano of Petty Rage, Eleve approx. 5 feet, 6 in. But the true masterstroke was what he'd done to the fence. He hadn't lowered it. Instead, in the single panel that blocked the window of shame, as Robert had started calling it, was a constant, gnawing humiliation. It was a portal through which Karen viewed not only Blue Mountain but also her own spectacular failure. Her authority within the HOA was in tatters. At the next monthly meeting, her motion to censure Alex for the Volcano of Petty Rage sign was voted down 3-1, with even Brenda abstaining, mumbling something about not wanting to provoke him further. The tide had turned. Karen was no longer the respected leader, she was the neighborhood's obsessed antagonist. This public loss of face was anathema to Karen. She couldn't accept defeat. If her neighbors and her own husband couldn't see the righteousness of her cause, she would have to take her case to a higher court of opinion. She needed a bigger stage, a wider audience that could appreciate her valiant struggle for order and decency. She needed the media. Her target was the local news station, Channel 8, specifically their popular human interest segment, Community Champions, hosted by a relentlessly cheerful reporter named Tiffany Vance. Karen saw the irony, but she believed she could frame her crusade as a championship of community values. She spent a week crafting the perfect email pitch, painting herself as a besieged volunteer president, fighting to protect her neighborhood from a rogue element who threatened to unravel the very fabric of suburban harmony. She attached her meticulously documented index of infractions, conveniently omitting any mention of her own midnight digging. To her astonishment, they responded. Tiffany Vance's producer thought it sounded like a quirky and compelling neighborhood dispute. They wanted to interview both sides. A jolt of panic shot through Karen. She hadn't counted on them talking to Alex, but she quickly suppressed it. This was her chance. On camera, his folksy charm would surely crumble under the weight of her evidence-based arguments. She would be poised, articulate, and presidential. He would come across as a flippant troublemaker. The day of the interview, Karen prepared as if for a state dinner. She wore her most authoritative yet non-threatening outfit, a cream-colored blazer over a sensible shell top. Her hair was sprayed into a helmet of immovable perfection. She rehearsed her talking points in front of a mirror, focusing on words like integrity, standards, and property values. When Tiffany Vance and her cameraman arrived, Karen welcomed them with a gracious, confident smile. She led them through her pristine home to the back deck, positioning them so the window of shame in Alex's fence was visible in the background. As you can see, Karen began, her voice a symphony of concerned civility. This is what we're up against, a complete disregard for the agreed-upon aesthetic of our beautiful community. The interview started well. Karen laid out her case, speaking eloquently about the importance of bylaws in maintaining a peaceful and orderly society. She presented the fence as the tip of the iceberg, a symbol of a deeper disrespect for the collective good. She was calm, reasonable, the very picture of a dedicated community leader. Tiffany Vance nodded along, her expression one of serious interest. "And what has Mr. Chen's response been to these concerns?" Tiffany asked. "Unfortunately, his response has been one of mockery and escalating antagonism," Karen said, gesturing toward the gnome memorial, which was just out of the camera's direct view. "He has treated our legally binding covenants as a joke." Then, it was Alex's turn. The crew moved next door. Karen watched from her deck, her heart pounding. She saw Alex greet Tiffany, not with a handshake, but with a plate of what looked like freshly baked cookies. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and jeans, looking relaxed and utterly unthreatening. They set up the interview on his porch, right next to the volcano of petty rage sign. Karen strained to hear, but could only catch snippets. She saw Alex laugh. She saw the cameraman chuckle. She even saw Tiffany Vance crack a wide, genuine smile. They were charmed. He was charming them. The segment aired 2 nights later. Karen gathered a resentful Robert to watch, convinced of her impending vindication. The segment was titled The Fence Feud of Harmony Creek. It began with Karen's interview. She looked stiff, severe. The camera seemed to highlight the tightness of her smile, the rigid set of her shoulders. Her carefully chosen words sounded pompous and bureaucratic on screen. The agreed-upon aesthetic of our community came across as petty and controlling. Then, the segment cut to Alex. The camera loved him. He was funny, self-deprecating, and immensely likable. "Honestly," he said, taking a bite of a cookie, "I just wanted some privacy. The fence might be 1.5 inches to tally. Guess my measurements were a bit off. I'm not a professional builder. I'm a graphic designer." He shrugged with a smile. "When I got the first note, I thought it was a prank. Then came the certified letters and, well, the midnight digging." The camera panned down to the gnome memorial. Tiffany Vance's voiceover explained the diorama with barely suppressed amusement. They showed a close-up of the gnome in the lilac pajamas, then a close-up of the gnome in the navy blue pantsuit. Alex continued, his tone shifting from amused to sincere. "Look, I believe in being a good neighbor. When Karen filed the complaint about the fence blocking the view, she was right. So, I cut a window for her." He gestured to the fence. "Problem solved. I just think sometimes we get so caught up in the rules that we forget to just be neighbors. All this," he said, gesturing to the whole scene, "is just my way of saying, can't we all just lighten up a little? Life's too short to get bent out of shape over an inch of wood." The segment ended with a shot of Tiffany Vance holding the volcano of petty rage sign, laughing. "In Harmony Creek," she signed off. "Harmony seems to be in short supply, but creativity certainly isn't. A lesson, perhaps, that sometimes the best way to mend fences is to cut a window in them." The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. Karen's phone began to buzz with notifications. The news station had posted the clip online, and it was going viral. The comments were a tidal wave of ridicule, aimed directly at her. She was HOA Zilla, President Petty, a soul-sucking fun vampire. Alex, meanwhile, was being hailed as a suburban folk hero, a legend of passive resistance. Someone started a GoFundMe page not to help him, but to buy Alex Chen a beer and more gnomes. It raised over $1,000 in the first hour. The consequences in the real world were just as devastating. Neighbors who were once politely neutral now averted their eyes when she passed. She overheard 2 women at the community pool referring to her as the volcano. Brenda called, her voice a panicked whisper. "Karen, the board wants another emergency meeting. They're talking about a vote of no confidence. A vote of no confidence." The words hit her like a physical slap. They were going to try and oust her. Her own board, her own allies, were turning on her, all because of a disastrous television appearance. The night of the board meeting, the atmosphere in her living room was thick with tension. Maria, the lawyer, ran the meeting. Karen was forced to sit on the side, a queen in exile in her own court. "Karen," Maria began, her tone professional but firm, "this situation has become a public embarrassment to the community. The fence feud story has been picked up by national blogs. We are now the poster children for dysfunctional HOAs. This is directly impacting our reputation and, frankly, our property values. Lenders and buyers see this kind of public infighting as a massive red flag." George, the accountant, chimed in, his voice grim. "Our insurance provider called. They're reviewing our policy in light of the ongoing community dispute and potential for litigation. That's code for your rates are about to skyrocket." Even Brenda wouldn't meet her eye. "People are laughing at us, Karen," she said softly. "My cousin from Ohio sent me the video. So this is it," Karen said, her voice shaking with rage. "You're abandoning me because of some bad press. I have done nothing but uphold the bylaws that you all swore to enforce." "You didn't just uphold the bylaws, Karen," Maria countered. "You engaged in a personal vendetta that has made this entire community look foolish. You harassed Mr. Chen, you alienated your neighbors, and you brought unwelcome and negative national attention to our door. You have breached your fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of the association." The vote was swift and brutal. 3-2-1. They voted no confidence in her presidency. George, Brenda, and Maria all raised their hands against her. Her reign was over. She was stripped of her title, her power, her entire identity. She was no longer HOA President Karen Sterling. She was just Karen, the crazy lady who dug a hole under her neighbor's fence and got roasted on TV. As the board members filed out of her house, leaving behind a profound and echoing silence, Karen sank onto her sofa. The room felt alien, the furniture accusatory. She had lost, utterly and completely. Alex Chen, with his cookies and his clever signs, had defeated her. He hadn't just won the battle of the fence. He had conquered the entire kingdom. She looked out the window. In the twilight, a new light flickered on in Alex's yard. He had used the GoFundMe money. Strung along the top of his fence, entwined with the glowing green caps, was a string of delicate, professional-grade LED lights. They illuminated the memorial excavation site and the volcano signpost, turning the entire tableau into a permanent art installation. It was beautiful, tasteful, and a soul-crushing monument to her defeat. A deep, cold fury, unlike anything. The title of president had been more than just a name tag at monthly meetings. It was the armature on which Karen had built her identity for the past decade. Without it, she felt hollowed out, a collapsed structure. The neighborhood, once her kingdom, was now a hostile territory. The friendly waves were gone, replaced by quick nods and averted gazes. The laughter she heard from passing groups felt pointed, each chuckle a tiny dart aimed at her pride. Her public humiliation was a suffocating cloak she couldn't take off. Robert, seeing her dethroned and miserable, attempted a clumsy reconciliation. He moved back into their bedroom. He'd say things like, "Maybe this is for the best, honey. A chance to relax. We could take that cruise to Alaska we talked about." But his words of comfort felt like pity, and pity was gasoline on the fire of her resentment. Relax. How could she relax when her nemesis lived next door? His victory garden of shame glowing triumphantly every night. Alex Chen, for his part, seemed to want a ceasefire. A week after the vote of no confidence, he left a small potted plant on her doorstep. It was a petunia, a Starlight Serenity petunia. Attached was a simple, handwritten note, a truce offering. "Let's get back to being neighbors." Karen stared at the pot with venomous contempt. A truce offering. After he had orchestrated her downfall, turned her into a national laughingstock, and usurped her authority. This wasn't an olive branch. It was the ultimate act of condescension. It was the victor pitying the vanquished. With a surge of cold fury, she picked up the pot, walked to her trash bin, and threw it in. Dirt, plant, and all. The ceramic pot shattered at the bottom, a satisfyingly final sound. There would be no truce. Her obsession denied the outlet of official HOA business, turned inward and festered. She stopped her morning walks. She resigned from the beautification committee. Her world shrank to the four walls of her house, and her focus narrowed to a single point: revenge. Not the petty rule-based revenge of before, but something deeper. Something that would cause Alex Chen real, tangible pain. Something that would make him regret the day he ever hammered a post into the ground next to her yard. She began to watch him with a new, predatory intensity. Her surveillance logs were no longer about bylaw infractions but about vulnerabilities. She documented his routines, his friends, the make and model of his car. She noted the freelance nature of his work, a graphic designer who worked from home. This was a key detail. His livelihood was tied to his reputation and his home office. An idea, dark and dangerous, began to form in the recesses of her mind. Harmony Creek, like many modern subdivisions, had strict zoning laws. One of them, which she knew by heart, was Ordinance 1138, the prohibition of major commercial operations in a residential zoned area. While a home office was permitted, running a full-fledged business with client traffic and commercial deliveries was strictly forbidden. Alex's work was digital, so he had no client traffic, but he did receive a lot of packages: art supplies, computer equipment, prototypes from printers. Could she frame this as a commercial operation? It was a stretch, but her humiliation had eroded her caution. She started small, making anonymous calls to the county zoning department. "I'd like to report a possible violation at 1-2 Harmony Creek Lane," she'd say, using a disposable burner phone she'd bought at a gas station. She disguised her voice, making it sound older, more quavering. "There are commercial trucks coming and going at all hours. I believe he's running some sort of distribution center out of his garage. It's very disruptive." The first few calls were likely dismissed, but Karen was persistent. She called every other day, each time with a new, slightly embellished detail. "I saw him unloading pallets. The noise from his machinery keeps me up at night. I'm worried about the hazardous materials." They were all lies, but she delivered them with the conviction of a true believer. The consequence of this campaign was a slow, creeping siege on Alex. A county zoning officer made another visit, then another. Alex would be forced to show them his home office, his garage, to prove he wasn't running a factory. The visits were an invasive nuisance, a disruption to his work, a constant source of stress. He had no idea where the complaints were coming from, but he was forced to defend himself against a phantom accuser. Karen watched the visits from her window, a grim satisfaction blooming in her chest. This was better than a fine for a tall fence. This was a direct attack on his peace of mind, his ability to earn a living. She felt a heady rush of power. She was a ghost in the machine, pulling levers of bureaucracy from the shadows. But it wasn't enough. The zoning department, after several inspections, sent Alex a letter stating the claims were unfounded and the case was closed. The system had failed her again. She needed to escalate. She needed something that couldn't be dismissed, something that would bring the full, terrifying weight of the government down on him. Her research led her to the IRS. She spent days studying the rules, for home office deductions, for freelance income, for business expenses. It was a labyrinth of codes and regulations, the perfect place to lay a trap. She would file an anonymous tip, not just a simple complaint, but a detailed, plausible-sounding allegation of massive tax fraud. She bought another burner phone and spent hours crafting her story. She would pose as a disgruntled former client of Alex's. "I'm calling to report tax evasion by a graphic designer named Alex Chen," she said to the agent on the IRS hotline, her voice now a clipped, professional alto. "I hired him for a large project last year. He insisted on being paid in cash. Tens of thousands of dollars. He bragged that the IRS would never know. He said he does it with all his clients." She gave them his address. She invented fake names of other clients he had supposedly defrauded. She wove a web of lies so intricate and detailed that it sounded terrifyingly real. This was a new low, even for her. It was a line she had never imagined crossing. Filing a false police report was a crime. Accusing someone of a federal offense could have life-altering consequences for him. A flicker of her old self, the land order president of the HOA screamed in protest. But the voice of the new Karen, the vengeful, shamed Karen, shouted it down. He had humiliated her publicly. He deserved to feel real fear. He deserved to have his life turned upside down. The waiting was agonizing. Weeks turned into a month, nothing happened. Karen began to think her tip had been lost in the vast bureaucracy of the IRS. She felt a strange mix of disappointment and relief. Then, one Tuesday morning, it happened. 2 black sedans, nondescript and menacing, pulled up in front of Alex's house. 4 people in dark suits got out. They didn't knock. They walked up to the door with an air of grim, unassailable authority. Karen watched, her breath caught in her throat, as they presented Alex with a warrant. They were IRS criminal investigators. The next few hours were a blur of horrifying activity. They searched his house. They carried out boxes of files, his computers, his hard drives. Alex stood on his lawn, pale and stunned, as his life was methodically packed into evidence boxes. Neighbors came out of their houses. Drawn by the commotion, they stared, whispered. The folk hero of the fence feud was now the subject of a federal raid. The narrative had changed in an instant. Karen should have felt triumphant. This was the ultimate victory. She had brought the full force of the federal government to his door. But as she watched the sheer terror and confusion on Alex's face, a cold, sickening dread washed over her. The gnomes in his yard looked pathetic and silly now, artifacts from a war of petty annoyances. This was no longer petty. This was real. She saw Maria, the lawyer from the HOA board, walk over and talk to Alex, putting a comforting hand on his arm. She saw Robert come out of their house, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. He looked at the scene at Alex's. Then he looked up at the window where he knew she was watching. Their eyes met, and the look he gave her was one of utter revulsion. He knew, somehow he knew she was behind this. The consequence of her action was immediate and devastating, but not for Alex. It was for her. In that moment, seeing the real-world impact of her poisoned lie, the intricate structure of her self-justification shattered. She wasn't a champion of order. She wasn't a wronged victim seeking justice. She was a monster. A spiteful, lonely woman who had tried to ruin a man's life over a fence. The weight of what she had done crashed down on her. The public shaming on TV was nothing compared to this private, internal disgrace. She backed away from the window, her hands shaking, her heart hammering against her ribs. The satisfaction she had craved was absent, replaced by a nauseating wave of guilt and fear. What had she done? This couldn't be undone. She had unleashed a force she couldn't control, and she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that it was only a matter of time before it came back to destroy her. The volcano of petty rage had finally erupted, and its lava was flowing straight back to consume its source. The black sedans became a recurring nightmare in the Harmony Creek cul-de-sac. For weeks, the federal investigation ground on, a silent, oppressive weight on the entire neighborhood. Alex Chen became a ghost in his own home. The friendly waves ceased. The creative yard installations gathered dust, and the window of shame looked less like a witty retort and more like a sad, gaping wound. He was forced to hire a lawyer. Maria, from the HOA board, had referred him to a top tax attorney, and the legal fees were crippling. His freelance business was dead in the water. His equipment was confiscated, and his reputation was poisoned by the whispers of a federal criminal investigation. Karen existed in a self-imposed prison of guilt. Every time she saw Alex leave his house, his shoulders slumped in defeat. A shard of ice pierced her heart. The cold fury that had driven her was gone, replaced by a constant gnawing anxiety. She had wanted to teach him a lesson, not destroy him. The scale of the damage she had inflicted was horrifying. Robert treated her with a frigid, surgical politeness. He spoke to her only when necessary. The shared space of their home was a dead zone, all warmth and intimacy extinguished. The look of revulsion he'd given her on the day of the raid had become his permanent expression when he looked at her. He knew. He didn't say it, but she knew that he knew. Her greatest crime wasn't just against Alex. It was against the man she had sworn to love and honor. She had shown him a part of her soul so ugly that he could no longer bear to look at it. The climax arrived not with a bang, but with a soberly worded letter. One afternoon, Karen watched as Alex walked to his mailbox and pulled out a thick envelope. From the Department of the Treasury. He stood there for a long time reading it, his posture unmoving. Then, slowly, he looked up across the lawn, his eyes scanning until they found her face in the window. He held up the letter and gave a single, slow nod. Then he turned and walked back inside. It wasn't a nod of triumph or of anger. It was a nod of finality, of understanding. 2 days later, the new HOA board, now led by Maria, called a mandatory, community-wide meeting in the clubhouse. The air was thick with tension and speculation. When Karen and Robert arrived, the room fell silent. People didn't just avert their gazes. They physically recoiled. The pariah had arrived. Maria stood at the podium, flanked by Alex Chen. He looked tired, worn down, but a spark of his old self had returned to his eyes. "Thank you all for coming," Maria began. "As many of you know, our neighbor, Alex Chen, has been the subject of a very serious and stressful investigation. I'm pleased to announce that the investigation is officially closed. The IRS has fully exonerated him, finding the anonymous tip that triggered the audit to be, and I quote, malicious, entirely fabricated, and without a shred of merit." A wave of relieved applause swept through the room. Alex stepped up to the microphone. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but steady. "Thank you all for your support, especially those of you who wrote letters of character on my behalf. It meant the world to me." He paused, his eyes sweeping the crowd until they landed on Karen. The entire room followed his gaze. Karen felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, hot and accusatory. "The investigation revealed something interesting," Alex continued, his voice never losing its calm. "The anonymous call was made from a burner phone, but the IRS, when they're investigating what they believe is a multi-million-dollar fraud case, have ways of tracking things. They tracked the phone's purchase to a gas station on the interstate. The station had security cameras." Karen's blood ran cold. The security camera, the one detail she had never considered. "They have video," Alex said, his voice dropping, "of the person who bought the phone, the person who made the call, the person who tried to ruin my life." He didn't need to say her name. Every single person in that room knew. The silence was deafening. Karen felt the world tilt on its axis. Robert put his head in his hands. "I have a choice to make," Alex said, still looking directly at Karen. "Filing a false federal report is a serious crime. The U.S. Attorney's Office is very interested in pursuing charges. It carries a penalty of up to 5 years in prison." A collective gasp went through the room. 5 years? The words hung in the air. A death sentence for the life Karen knew. She could feel her heart trying to hammer its way out of her chest. This was it, the final reckoning. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the killing blow. "But here's the thing," Alex said, and his tone shifted. "This whole, stupid, insane feud started over a fence. Over standards, over what it means to be a good neighbor. And I've been thinking about what a good neighbor would do, and sending my neighbor to prison. It just doesn't feel like the right answer." Karen opened her eyes. Alex was no longer looking at her with anger. It was something else. Pity. No, it was more complex than that. "So, here's the deal I've offered," he announced to the room. "No criminal charges will be pursued. In exchange, Mrs. Sterling will pay for all of my legal fees and damages, which are substantial. She will also issue a formal public apology to me and to the community. And, finally, she will sell her house and leave Harmony Creek permanently." It was a brilliant move. Not vengeance, but exile. A banishment that was both a profound punishment and a strange kind of mercy. He wasn't just defeating her. He was erasing her from the community she had terrorized. The neighbors began to murmur their approval. It was a just end. A clean slate for Harmony Creek. Karen felt a bizarre sense of relief wash over the terror. It was over. She didn't have to fight anymore. She had lost so completely, so utterly, that there was nothing left to defend. She stood up, her legs trembling. Robert stood with her, his face grim but resolved. He looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, the revulsion was gone, replaced by a deep, weary sadness. He gave a slight nod, accepting their fate. "We accept the terms," Robert said, his voice raspy, speaking for them both. The meeting ended. As people filed out, no one spoke to them. They were already ghosts. They walked home in silence. The for sale sign already mentally hammered into their perfect lawn. The monument of shame wasn't the gnomes or the window anymore. it was the invisible, indelible stain on their lives. That evening, as Karen started to pack the first box, she looked out her window one last time at Alex's yard. The glowing lights were on. The gnomes stood their silent, cheerful watch. The whole display looked different now, not mocking, but resolute. Then she saw something she'd never noticed before. Alex was in his yard, not near the fence, but by the foundation of his own house. He was working on a new project. He was installing a small, discreet metal plaque onto the brickwork. From her window, she couldn't read the words, but she could see it was professionally made, permanent. It wasn't a joke or a piece of guerrilla art. It looked official. A deep, unsettling curiosity, the last ember of her old self, flickered within her. What was it? What final statement was he making? The ending was satisfying. Karen had faced a real and fitting consequence, a public downfall and banishment that she had brought entirely upon herself. Her marriage was broken, her reputation destroyed, her home lost. Yet a thread of mystery remained, tugging at the audience's mind. The feud was over, but what was the meaning of that final, cryptic plaque on Alex's own foundation? It wasn't part of the battle with Karen. It was something else, something personal to him, something that predated her. What was the real story of the man and one to be? What unseen foundation had he been protecting all along? The monument of shame for Karen was built and dismantled, but another, more mysterious monument had just been dedicated, leaving the door quietly open for a new chapter in the story of Harmony Creek.